I do want to jump into is just kind of the birth of genius, because from my understanding, I want you to confirm this as well and kind of just break down what you can or talk about it. As far as the developers with Genius, I heard there's about 10 different developers, and that you have, I don't know if it's two or three or just two devs that were part of Hex. Is that true, or do you want to elaborate on that and kind of explain, you know, how many developers you have, and if that story is true? Because it's just rumored to me. I've never confirmed or asked you.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's a good question. I have zero developers right now. There's no developers right now. I mean, you know how it is with the whole finished product kind of a thing. Uh, Prior to that, the birth of Genius, it really came from inspiration from both Dash and Steam, where, because you remember with Steam, if you used it, but that was around the Pivx times. With Steam, it was like a medium.com, so it was like a blogging site, and or that was its first showcase of how to use the blockchain, and their rewards were based on people's attention, where people would they would see a cool blog, so they would upvote it, right? And these whales and these people, as they had more rewards and as they had more steam, their upvote could hold a lot of weight to where the individual was getting paid a lot more from whales who are giving them their attention. And there are a lot of other things with Dash that had done that too, but the birth of Genius really started with me writing these articles on the future of money. If you go to the web domain or the URL, type it in geni.to, geni.to/money. I believe that's the link. It goes to an old Steam site. And so from here, with these different ideas of the future of money, and as well with myself being just in so many different, it was a bit, well, Discord back then, different Discord groups, different Slack groups. I wasn't using IRC anymore after that, sharing a lot of these ideas. And, ultimately the people that ended up talking with me the most about it, and me talking with them the most about it, and us working together, involved an individual who has their PhD in mathematics and such, and they're an engineer, and with like thermal dynamics and all sorts of crazy stuff. They're an engineer, and the other two individuals, they're very inspirational as far as their input on tokenomics for Hex. And those two individuals specifically, they've asked me since the very beginning, since it was turning into a token, to not mention them, not bring them in. I believe one of them was in the early Genius chat room. They left it. They didn't want to be seen as any part of that, right? So they don't want to be doxxed. And when implementation came forward, where you have to turn this into a real idea, right? You have to get people to, you have to take the idea, the white papers, the formulas, the the math, the formulas. When you take this idea, then you gotta translate it to something like Solidity, which uh, which has limitations, right? Like, I mean, math has limitations too, but it has limitations. And so from there, um, you see the team, the landscape right now with smart contract developers is insanely, I can't say cutthroat anymore, but it's riddled with scammers, and it's also riddled with people who you can't get their attention because they already have an extremely well-paying arrangement, right? So, um, so at first, it was very much a shotgun approach of finding contract developers, and excuse me, and although I know Solidity and etc., um, this really isn't a position that I could be the only programmer. Another person that designed tokenomics could be, and another one didn't want to be because they're extremely wealthy and just kind of like, it's a cool idea, but I'm doing other things. Like, this is interesting. I'd love to talk about it. So so the team, very shotgun approach at first, hired a lot of people and fired a lot of people, and ultimately that team ended up being at one point um, like more than full time. At one point, like 8 people working more than full time, and another maybe 5 people working part-time. And all in all, we went through probably 20 different team members.
So you guys did a lot of sounds like juggling around of developers, like you said, firing and hiring, and sound like you've had some people from the Steam background, which I was an early investor in Steam. I know a lot of crypto OGs were from that time as well. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I just remember being on there and hoping to God one of the whales would upvote me and become it would follow me so that I can earn passive income
Yeah.
through blogging. It was fun. Um, so that's how the birth of Genius happened. Was that
Mm-hmm.
by, I mean, I know you were saying inspired by Dash and Steam and other collected ideas, but when it comes to Hex, that had to have been a big inspiration as far as some of the tokenomics. And I know the tokenomics are very different from tokenomics to pumpamentals. But where did Hex come in? Where it was like, I mean, you guys seem similar from a lot of people point
Mm-hmm.
of view.
Where that came in is uh, right at about the point where I and another individual were sitting there going, okay, well, really, I and 2 other individuals, just, one of them you can't really say, um, was a fair contribution with tokenomics. Uh, and not in a good or bad way, but more inspirational way. So I and a couple other people were like, all right, let's do this token. It's time, got all the info we need. And before that, it's like, well, yeah, I decided, let me really look into, um, the Twitter world and the crypto world, see what's going on in there. And at that time, I was also running, you could call it like a savings kind of product. Excuse me, that had to do with like storing your value and incentivizing the rewards behind that. And on Twitter, I ran into the whole, Hex world left and right, and it never really grabbed my attention. And then someone from the Dash world was saying like, "Oh man, this makes so much sense." So at that point, right at that point, it had already been maybe, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 years of yeah, I think like 4 years of just like passive research. Like not like, all this, everyone that was talking together in, chat room wise, it didn't turn into a whole, working 40 hours a week. It was a very passive research, very passive looking at other ideas, very passive, this is a cool idea, but there's problems with it. Very passively getting inspiration from the world to figure out like, what's going on, right? And so when I found out about Hex and got into that, um, there wasn't a whole lot that was new about Hex. However, um, however, the reward system being weighted on time, which of course, I mean Hex isn't the first to do this, but being weighted on time, that was really interesting, right? But not only was that interesting, but there was a ton of language already developed because after all, these kind of ideas you can't tell people about a store of value and get them interested. They're like, store of value? That just sounds like my savings account. Doesn't really sound very interesting because my savings account sucks. Well, no, let me tell you why it doesn't suck, right? It's a very difficult thing to communicate. So, Hex, this is where Hex helped out. Hex helped uh, the ability for words to be used to communicate this better and find other really intelligent people. So that's how ultimately, like, I found Alex, who is somebody who doesn't mind to be docked. And Alex is the PhD in mathematics and engineer, and he found that like really cool. So he like I'd been talking to Alex for a while, but he really understood what I was talking about with what became Genius. He started to really understand that through metaphors, hex metaphors. And as well, I got very much involved with Hex. Cool. I got this idea for a store of value. I mean, hey, if Hex is exactly what I'm thinking about or what I've been having discussions about, then why not use it? Don't, for me, it's don't recreate the wheel. And within about a couple months, I started finding problems with Hex like really quickly. None of them that seemed to be a big tokenomics issue. And then ultimately, after about like I think it was like a year later, a little more than a year later, I started going really, really hardcore into um, like the communications of that. When it came to Hex, I was in many of Hex's chat rooms, many of Hex's specific chat rooms. And through there, I met other individuals, and two individuals who had a lot of other tokenomics ideas. One of them in particular was like, hey, I think this is extremely interesting. This idea that no matter how high the market price goes, then that's kind of like no matter how high you throw something in the air, it's going to fall down with equal energy. So this was like inspiration of one of the tokenomics people behind Hex, which was that like, this is actually a problem everywhere, but people don't see it as a problem because there's no solution. This, quote, problem where if the price of any stock is rising or any crypto is rising, ultimately you're going to have people who bought lower and bought lower and bought lower. And no matter what, there's going to come some point where their profits are just too sexy and beautiful that that they're very much happy to leave, right? And if their profits are 1,000x, 2,000x, or even 10,000x, especially if the system was designed to force you to delay your gratification, or you believed force you, but turned out not as much as you thought, um, then you have people doing just that, ending at 1,000x, or saying, "Wow, I 2,000x, I 5,000x. That's amazing." And Hex was very much about that. You hear things about like, don't end early, it's terrible. Your average person who used Hex, if they wanted to end early, they saw and they still see today this very scary sign that with these like animating red and yellow like stripies going like, hey, you need to make sure you absolutely know what you're doing here. Instead of the UI telling you, hey, by the way, you're going to lose 10% of your principal if you end your stake. So Hex made that a reality for far more people than I think any other asset had done. And so therefore, the higher you throw something in the air, the more energy is going to come down. If you 1,000, however you affected the market 2 years ago or 1 year ago when you bought something, right? Like let's say you didn't even push the market by 0.1% or 0.01%. Well, after 1,000x, your 0.01% is going to bring the price down by 1%. Your 10,000x, you as one individual can bring the price down between 1 and 10%, depending where you get in, right? So when you have these holders, right, they're eventually going to want to get that reward, especially in the society we're in. So that itself was a big problem that started with one of the Hex individuals finding very interesting that it was something that there could be a solution to. So that's where Genius started to really explode with momentum and move forward with not just the pre-token, but also starting the plans on how this was going to really work and how these tokenomics were going to go together, and did they work, and was it like game theory that that had a desired outcome, but also game theory that you know you, like a lot of games that you aren't able to cheat, where you aren't able to break the game rules and therefore break the game.